Have you ever felt that strange emptiness in a crowded room, surrounded by noise, yet somehow more alone than ever? Maybe you've caught yourself scrolling endlessly, moving from conversation to conversation, and still feeling like something is missing. It's not weakness. It's a quiet signal that the version of you who could change everything has not yet been born. The truth is, he doesn't appear when you're distracted, comforted, or endlessly entertained. He shows up only when the noise fades, when you've stepped back far enough to hear your own thoughts. That version of you is sharper. He doesn't flinch at silence. He doesn't chase approval. He doesn't bend under pressure. He builds, calculates, and moves with a kind of clarity that the distracted man will never know. Most people never get there. They run from silence. They cling to comfort. They mistake constant connection for strength, when in reality it drains them. But solitude, when chosen, is not loneliness. It's a forge. It burns away what is shallow and leaves you with something unshakable. In this video, I want to walk with you into that space, to show why being alone can become your greatest weapon. Stay with me, and maybe you'll begin to see solitude in a way you never have before. 1. Clarity born from solitude. Have you ever wondered why so many people go through life without truly seeing it? Not because they lack intelligence, but because they are never alone long enough to notice what is real. The world wraps them in a fog of chatter, conversations that repeat, opinions that are borrowed, emotions that swirl without direction. In this fog, they adopt beliefs that don't belong to them. They react instead of reflect. They conform because it feels safer than questioning. They follow because the crowd seems less frightening than silence. And the most dangerous part of all is that they start lying to themselves. With friends and constant company around, there is always someone to keep the illusion alive. But the man who chooses solitude is stripped of that protection. The masks begin to crack. The lies melt away, and suddenly he stands face to face with truths that most people will never dare to confront. This is why solitude is not just peace. It is a weapon. Because the truths that rise from silence give you leverage that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or inherited. They can only be earned in the absence of noise. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." It is in that retreat, in that private chamber of thought, that clarity sharpens like a blade. History gives us an example in Niccolò Machiavelli. When he was cast out, disgraced, and cut off from the political life he once dominated, he did not spend his nights begging for sympathy or railing against injustice. He withdrew. He used exile as his forge. In the silence of his banishment, he observed people without the filters of politeness or performance. What did he see? That most men are cowards hiding behind the mask of morality. That loyalty is rarely pure, always conditional. That fear, though unpopular to admit, is more dependable than love. That people crave control, so long as it is exercised with skill. These are not comfortable truths, but they are truths nonetheless, and they gave him a vision into human behavior as precise as a master of chess. Imagine if you could sharpen your sight in the same way. What would your life look like if you stepped back from the haze? No friends telling you half-truths to spare your feelings. No endless feed of social media rewarding shallow status. No circle of shallow conversation pulling your mind away from what matters. Just you, alone with the raw facts of who you are and where you stand. At first, it is brutal. At first, it feels like too much. But then, something shifts. You stop lying to yourself. You stop hiding from the excuses you have rehearsed for years. You start to see clearly. And with that clarity comes an advantage that most people never touch. Think of a man walking through a market filled with distractions. Everyone else is caught up in shouting, buying, laughing, fighting. But one man climbs to a higher balcony. From there he sees the whole market clearly, the patterns, the weaknesses, the flows of power others are too entangled to notice. That is what solitude gives you. While others make choices driven by mood, you are calculating. While they run toward pleasures that fade, you are positioning yourself for something lasting. While they play roles written by others, you are quietly writing your own script. This is why the time you spend alone becomes the most valuable currency. It reveals who actually respects you and who only pretends. It shows you who fears you and who seeks to use you. But most importantly, it forces you to stop deceiving yourself. When the crowd falls away, there is no one left to applaud your excuses. You either face your laziness, your vanity, your hollow goals, or you break. Seneca reminded us, no man was ever wise by chance. Wisdom is born in these confrontations with the self, when no audience is left to flatter you. And if you endure that process without running back to the comfort of noise, something rare happens. You no longer crave to be right. You crave to see clearly. Clarity becomes more precious than approval, and that clarity arms you with vision that is sharper than anyone still wandering in fog. You see patterns in people they never recognize in themselves. You see weaknesses hidden behind confidence, insecurities dressed as pride. You notice how power shifts beneath the surface, even as others remain caught in emotion. Suddenly, you are not simply surviving life's game, you are reading it in advance. That is why so many of the most powerful men in history were not always surrounded by applause or company. They often stood alone, not because they despised people, but because they prized truth more than comfort. They understood that unfiltered truth cannot be found while trying to please, while clinging to the need to be liked, or while addicted to applause. It can only be found when there is no one left to lie to, not even yourself. So the question becomes, will you choose the silence that strips illusions away, or will you drown with the crowd that fears it? Solitude is not the retreat of the weak. It is the proving ground of the strong. When you return from it, you are no longer the same man. You are sharper. You are colder. You see the game differently. And from that new vantage point, power stops being something you chase. It becomes something you wield. And that is where true strength begins. From here, the next step is not simply about vision, but about how solitude itself reshapes the way you move in the world. 2. Breaking free from approval. Have you ever noticed how fragile most people become the moment they're left to themselves? Strip away the applause, the messages, the praise, and suddenly they begin to unravel. Their worth dissolves, not because they are weak in body, but because their confidence was never truly theirs. It was borrowed. Most men cannot stand alone because their entire identity is outsourced. They are addicted, not to food or drink, but to the constant validation of others. Without approval, they cannot think. Without attention, they cannot act. Without being liked, they cannot rest. Seneca once warned, "He who looks for approval outside himself places his fate in the hands of another." And that is the reality most people live in, slaves to the opinions of the crowd, mistaking dependence for connection, obedience for love. Machiavelli, centuries later, spoke the same truth with ruthless precision. The one who depends on others to stand will fall when they walk away. And if you look around today, that prophecy is everywhere. A man who only acts when his peers agree with him. A woman who cannot feel worthy until the world praises her. Young people who rise and fall with the tides of social media, unable to rest unless they are seen. This is not freedom. This is a cage, carefully disguised as belonging. But solitude smashes this pattern. The man who learns to walk alone begins to reclaim what others surrendered. He stops begging for affection because his dignity no longer needs an audience. He stops chasing popularity because clarity has replaced applause as his measure of worth. He does not wait to be chosen because he has already chosen himself. And that choice terrifies others because it creates a man who cannot be owned. When you no longer need the world's handouts of approval, you cut the strings that make most people puppets. Consider it practically. When your emotions depend on others, you become predictable. If they flatter you, you rise. If they ignore you, you collapse. If they criticize you, you crumble. And so, without realizing it, you hand over control of your energy, your choices, your very identity. But the man who embraces solitude takes that control back. He's not unkind, but he's untouchable. He no longer dances when others pull the strings, because there are no strings left to pull. And this is why society whispers, "Don't be alone. Stay connected. Stay visible." Because a man who becomes comfortable in solitude cannot be easily governed. He becomes his own ruler. Machiavelli did not romanticize human nature. He stripped it bare. He saw that most people are driven by need for safety, need for affection, need for recognition. And because of these needs, they can be led like cattle, controlled like water following the easiest slope. Offer them comfort, and they submit. Threaten their status, and they obey. Withhold love, and they break. But what happens when you cut those strings? What happens when you no longer crave what others can give you? Then you become untouchable. A man who requires nothing is a man no one can bargain with. Picture a simple story. A young man builds his entire life on the approval of his circle of friends. Every choice he makes bends toward their acceptance. Their laughter comforts him. Their opinions guide him. Their applause sustains him. Then one day, betrayal comes. They turn on him, or they simply leave. His foundation collapses. He feels shattered, but the truth is, he was never whole. He was always leaning on borrowed strength. Compare him to another man, one who has spent his nights in solitude, learning to face his doubts without anyone to reassure him. When betrayal comes, he bends, but he does not break. His dignity remains intact because it was never theirs to give. This is why kings, generals, and rulers have always guarded solitude. Not because they despised people, but because they knew that power requires distance. Proximity breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds contempt, and contempt erodes respect. Distance, on the other hand, preserves presence. It ensures that when they step forward, their actions carry weight. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." But what chance do you have at quality thought if your mind is flooded with borrowed voices? Every opinion you adopt untested, every emotion you mirror unconsciously, every fear you inherit without knowing it. Solitude purifies this noise. It forces you to stand on your own reasoning, to weigh it, to trust it. And in doing so, you begin to grow mentally self-sufficient. Think of a fortress. If its gates are always open, if its walls are filled with strangers, its strength is an illusion. It may look alive, but it is vulnerable. Now imagine a fortress closed, reinforced, built from within. That is the man who has embraced solitude. He is not hostile to the world. He simply no longer depends on it. He doesn't fear rejection because he no longer waits to be chosen. He doesn't fear neglect because he no longer needs to be seen. His confidence is not a reflection, it is his own light. Of course, solitude is not glamorous. It feels cold at times. It can sting when silence confronts you with emptiness. But it is precisely in that silence that strength begins to grow. Most cannot endure it, and so they run back to comfort. But those who endure emerge unrecognizable. They become men who cannot be bribed by compliments, shaken by rejection, or destroyed by neglect. They move with a kind of freedom that is frightening to those who still depend on the crowd. So ask yourself this: are you living owned by the eyes of others, or are you learning to walk free in the silence? Because in solitude, you discover the kind of power no one can take away. And once you build on that foundation, the path forward changes. You stop living as if borrowed and begin living as if sovereign. And from here, the next step becomes clear. Solitude does not only strip you from dependence, it transforms how you experience time itself. And that shift will show you why those who walk alone always walk ahead. 3. The forge of true power. Have you ever asked yourself what solitude truly looks like when it is lived, not just imagined? We often romanticize the idea of being alone, picturing serene landscapes or peaceful mornings. But in reality, solitude is much sharper, more demanding, and far more transformative than most expect. It is saying no to invitations that drain your energy. It is stepping away from people who may soothe you with comfort, but offer nothing that helps you grow. It is standing firm in the face of misunderstanding, being disliked, even feared, because you have chosen a path larger than approval. Solitude is long nights of thinking while others waste themselves in chatter, careful planning while others seek distraction, steady building while others scatter their focus. It is not easy. It is not glamorous, and it is certainly not popular. Yet history shows that this is exactly how the sharpest minds forge their empires. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this better than most. He studied power not by pleasing crowds, not by securing favor through flattery, but through ruthless observation and cold calculation. And he did it alone. Stripped of his influence, disgraced and exiled, he did not beg to be restored. He vanished into silence. In that silence he wrote The Prince, a manual so incisive, so unflinching, that it unsettled rulers for centuries. He did not need an army. He did not need applause. He needed one thing only: distance from the noise. That distance gave him vision, it gave him clarity, it gave him control. But the question is not what Machiavelli did. The question is, can you do the same? Can you detach yourself from the need for constant attention? Can you walk away from shallow relationships and hollow support? Can you trust your own voice more than the noise of the crowd? If you can, you already stand ahead of 99% of men. Because most never escape the trap. They chase love as if it were oxygen, applause as if it were proof of existence, belonging as if it were life itself. They give everything away for acceptance, and in doing so, they lose themselves. But the man who builds without needing, who thinks without asking, who moves without waiting, that man is dangerous. He doesn't need to explain. He doesn't need to be liked. He doesn't need anything. And precisely because he needs nothing, he can take everything. The world worships connection. It glorifies relationships, endless friendships, and constant interaction. From every angle, the message is clear. Don't be alone. It's dangerous. It's sad. Yet this message is nothing but chains disguised as comfort. It is precisely this fear of solitude that keeps most people powerless. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. But how can you discover such strength if you are always tangled in the emotions and opinions of others? Solitude becomes the training ground for sovereignty. It strips you of dependency until what remains is a man who can stand on his own thoughts without trembling. Picture a craftsman who tries to build a fortress in the middle of a carnival. Every sound pulls his attention away. Every voice interrupts his focus. Every distraction dilutes the strength of his work. The fortress never rises because the environment does not allow it. Solitude is the opposite. It clears the carnival, empties the space, silences the noise, until at last the craftsman can build something enduring. You cannot develop precision while you're pulled in every direction. You cannot sharpen your judgment when you're distracted every 5 minutes. And you cannot master your emotions while you're entangled in everyone else's problems. What looks like retreat is not weakness. It is refinement. Consider this story. A young statesman once believed that constant presence in the king's court was the key to influence. He attended every gathering, every banquet, every meeting. He was liked, he was noticed, but he was never taken seriously. Then disgrace fell upon him and he was exiled from the court. At first he thought his life was over, yet in solitude he began to see with new eyes. Away from the chatter, he saw patterns of power that had been hidden by noise. When he returned years later, his words carried a different weight because they were no longer born of flattery but of observation. People whispered that he had changed. The truth was, he had finally become himself. This is the paradox most never grasp. To be alone is not weakness. To be constantly surrounded by people who distract you, slow you down, and dilute your focus, that is weakness. Solitude, when embraced properly, is the birthplace of power. It is the arena where you test yourself against the silence, where you confront your own mind without the cushion of applause. And in that confrontation, your vision sharpens, your judgment strengthens. You become harder to fool, harder to manipulate, harder to break. Most people cling to others as emotional crutches, terrified of sitting alone with their thoughts. They aren't building anything meaningful in their connections, they are avoiding themselves. But here lies the hard truth. If you cannot sit in a room alone without losing your mind, you have no power. Because power is not first about controlling others, it is about sovereignty over yourself. And sovereignty is only proven in solitude, when no one is watching, no one is clapping, and no one is coming to save you. So if you find yourself afraid of silence, ask why. Ask what it reveals about you. Ask what truths you are hiding behind company, behind conversation, behind comfort. Because when you dare to sit with those truths, when you dare to strip away the illusions, you are no longer building for approval, you are building for power. And that power will not be borrowed, it will be yours. From here, the question becomes even deeper. Solitude doesn't only reshape your character, it transforms your relationship with time itself. And once you learn to command time, you will understand why those who master solitude are always 5 steps ahead of the world. 4. Silence sharpens the mind. Have you ever noticed how the mind seems to drown when it is constantly surrounded by chatter, distraction, and endless noise? It's as if your thoughts lose their sharpness, your focus scatters, and your energy leaks away without you even realizing it. The truth is simple. Your brain adapts to whatever environment you place it in. If you are always in the middle of gossip, arguments, and superficial conversations, your mind will adjust to that chaos. It will begin to mirror the disorder around it. But when you withdraw, when you isolate yourself and strip away the noise, something powerful happens. Your mind has no one left to lean on, no distractions to numb the discomfort, no convenient illusions to hide behind. It is just you, alone with the truth. And that truth, at first, can feel brutal. It will expose your laziness. It will confront the excuses you've been rehearsing for years. It will demand that you evolve or be devoured by your own weakness. This is where most men break, because facing yourself without filters, without applause, without rescue is one of the hardest battles you will ever fight. But if you endure it, if you learn to sit with it instead of running back to comfort, something rare happens. You begin to develop clarity. You gain emotional independence. You become the kind of person who no longer needs constant reassurance. You stop depending on others for balance, and you start trusting yourself. That kind of man is unstoppable. Machiavelli understood this. He once observed that it is safer to be feared than loved. Why? Because love depends on closeness, on constant attention, on the fragile threads of emotion. But fear, it can be built in absence. It can be sustained from a distance. It does not require vulnerability. It requires control. And solitude, above all things, trains control. It forces you to regulate yourself without waiting for someone else to stabilize you. It demands self-discipline when no one is watching. It builds toughness when no one is encouraging you. It clears the fog when there are no voices left to guide you. And when you come out of that solitude, you return different, colder, sharper, focused, unbothered by opinions, uninterested in petty drama, immune to nonsense. People will whisper, "You've changed. You're distant. You're hard to reach." Good. Let them talk. You are not building to be liked. You are building to be respected, to be feared, to be impossible to replace. So yes, disappear. Go silent. Cut the noise and give yourself the space to create what no one sees coming. Because the man who can master solitude can master anything. You cannot sharpen a blade in a storm, and you cannot sharpen your mind in constant noise. Yet this is where modern society keeps most men trapped, in a flood of input. Notifications, conversations, clutter. Everyone is talking, but no one is thinking. Men consume all day, regurgitate what they hear, and call it intelligence. They mistake memory for wisdom. But wisdom does not come from endless noise. It comes from silence. Machiavelli knew this centuries ago. He was not a comfortable philosopher writing from luxury. He wrote from exile, rejection, political humiliation. And instead of filling that silence with complaints, he sharpened his mind like a blade. He turned observation into a weapon, stripped away illusions, and produced The Prince. A book so precise, so unnerving, that it has terrified rulers for 500 years. Why? Because it was not written in the heat of emotion, but in the stillness of clarity. Noise makes your mind reactive. Silence makes it strategic. When you are constantly surrounded by others, you begin to think like them. You absorb their fears, their limits, their mediocrity. You don't even realize it, but your thoughts stop being your own. You become part of the herd. But when you separate yourself, when you cut the stream of constant opinion, something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear your own mind clearly, perhaps for the very first time, and what you find can disturb you. You realize how little of your thinking was ever truly yours. You see how much of your identity came from imitation. You feel the discomfort of discovering that you've been asleep, mentally soft. But here's the paradox. That discomfort is the beginning of power. Because in silence, you finally have the chance to rebuild. You start making decisions not from emotion, but from calculation. You weigh consequences instead of chasing impulses. You consider angles, not applause. You stop thinking in terms of today's comfort, and you start strategizing for the long game. This is how rulers think. This is how Machiavelli trained himself, isolated, dismissed by the world, irrelevant to the crowd, but already 5 steps ahead of kings. The quietest room produces the sharpest mind. Look around and you'll see it. People talk too much because they think too little. They fear silence because silence reveals truth. And most people don't want truth, they want comfort. But comfort never produces strength. Comfort never produces clarity. Power does not grow in comfort. It grows in silence. Here is what silence gives you. Focus, your energy stops scattering, your attention locks in. Discipline, you control your impulses instead of being controlled by them. Pattern recognition, you start to see how people think, how they move, how they fall. Self-control, you become harder to provoke, harder to read, harder to break. You stop reacting and you start calculating. And it is at this point that people begin to fear you. Not because you are cruel, but because they can no longer predict you. You are not emotional. You are not impulsive. You are no longer normal. You have gone quiet and deliberate. And when you finally speak, your words strike like a hammer. Not because you shout, but because they were forged in stillness. This is why Machiavellian thinking is feared. It is not loud. It is not impulsive. It is designed. And the average mind, drowning in noise, cannot compete with design. So, understand this. If you want your mind to become a weapon, you must separate. You must protect your time, your thoughts, your attention. You must train yourself to endure silence until your brain stops craving distraction and starts producing strategy. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is concentration, and the man who can sit still, think deeply and act precisely, he becomes something rare. A thinker among talkers, a ruler among followers, a weapon in a world drowning in noise. From here, the next question is clear. If silence sharpens the mind, what happens when you learn to command your time with the same precision? 5. Time as a weapon. Have you ever stopped to realize that the most precious thing you own is slipping through your fingers every single day? Not money, not possessions, not even loyalty, but time. Time is the hidden currency of life, more valuable than gold, rarer than true friendship, and more dangerous than any weapon when it is wasted. And yet, most men bleed it dry. They wake up reactive, already behind. They open their eyes, and their first thought is not their own. It belongs to the messages waiting on their phones. They spend their day chasing cheap dopamine, entertaining people they don't need, making plans they never wanted. Without knowing it, they have handed control of their lives to the noise of the world. They are not living. They are slaves to distraction, bound to the agenda of others. But the man who learns to walk alone, who dares to guard his solitude, is different. He does not merely control his time, he owns it. And when time is sharpened into a weapon, it becomes the greatest advantage in business, in battle, and in life itself. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He had no fortune to lean on, no throne to command, no army to protect him. What he did possess, however, was something most rulers never achieve: autonomy over his hours. While politicians wasted their energy in arguments, he studied. While courtiers chased favor, he calculated. While others scattered themselves in distraction, he built clarity in silence. His true power was not in the approval of others, but in the mastery of his time. Here lies the Machiavellian truth. No man can lead anything until he first commands his hours. And no man can command his hours if he is always surrounded by people. When you are constantly around others, you fall into response mode. You answer their crises, bend to their urgency, live at the speed of their noise. You become reactive instead of deliberate. That is why solitude is not weakness. It is tactical advantage. It removes you from the contagion of emotions that spreads through the crowd. It allows you to operate on your own rhythm, not theirs. And when you control your rhythm, you control the field. Think of it in practical terms. The man who is always available is always exhausted. The man who says yes to everything does nothing well. The man who fears missing out eventually loses himself in mediocrity. But the man who embraces solitude becomes a master of priorities. He doesn't fill time just to fill it. He uses it with intent. Every hour is chosen. Every action is aligned with purpose. Every move is deliberate, and that kind of precision compounds. 1 year of this discipline can put you 5 years ahead of the distracted man who spends his life scattering his attention. This is why the truly powerful move in silence. They do not broadcast every step. They do not explain every choice. They vanish into solitude, reappear when it matters, and change the game in ways others never saw coming. Solitude is their secret, not because it looks impressive, but because it gives them something the crowd can never afford: the luxury of thought. While others improvise under pressure, they plan. While others talk, they build. While others waste time, they create. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." The brutal truth is that if you cannot sit alone with your calendar, your long-term vision, and your own thoughts, you are not steering your life. You are a pawn in someone else's plan. Solitude is not about dramatics or cutting ties for the sake of pride. It is about choosing to live deliberately. You no longer waste hours on small talk. You no longer entertain pointless opinions. You no longer chase the approval of those who drain you. Instead, you eliminate, you organize, you execute. And when you live this way, your work becomes sharper, your presence becomes rare, your words begin to carry weight. People notice that you operate on a different clock. They whisper, "He moves differently. He's always ahead. He never seems rushed." Exactly. Because while they are drowning in noise, you are building in silence. While they chase urgency, you are unbothered, focused, and precise. Machiavelli knew that rulers did not simply need armies, they needed time. Time to plot, time to think, time to act with clarity. And that cannot be done when you are always available, always talking, always reacting. So if you want to separate yourself from the herd, start with solitude. Guard your hours as if they were gold. Use silence as your shield. Treat time as your sharpest weapon, because the man who owns his time owns his life. And from this ownership comes something greater, the power to move not at the world's pace, but at your own, setting a rhythm that others must learn to follow. And once you reach that level, the next step reveals itself. Solitude not only buys you time, it transforms the way others perceive you, making your very presence a force of influence. Step away from noise, own your time, return sharper. Comment, stay silent, and subscribe to keep walking this path.